feel like I need to talk about progressive overload here because although many people understand it or they think they understand it, a lot of people are missing the key. And I'm going to start with calling it progressive tension overload, not just progressive overload. So most people, if you say, hey, what's progressive overload? Hey, like I got to increase my reps, I got to increase my weight on an exercise, or increase both to lead to more muscle gain over time. That makes sense, right? However, weights, cables, Smith machine, whatever, we'll just call it external load, is just a tool to create tension where you want it. So in your muscles being trained, right? So if you go from having great technique, let's say on a incline Smith machine press, where a lot of that tension is in your pecs, and then you go up in weight, but your technique gets worse, you can actually can produce less tension in your pecs, even though you're using more weight. So actually an example I literally heard about today is someone going from doing an incline press of, let's say, 315, and maybe their form isn't the best. So then they go back down in weight to improve their form, and that is seen as a regression. However, it can be the case, and many times it is the case, where if you improve your technique to such an extent and you take your weight down to where it forces you to take your weight down, you are potentially, and a lot of the times, actually producing more tension with less weight. I know it's a revolutionary concept, but the weight only matters if it translates to tension. If that weight, if you, easy example, if you're doing a bicep curl and you're using everything, your back, your legs, everything probably but your bicep to heave the weight up, versus if you do a very strict curl, what's the difference there? The result, what's the resulting difference? You're putting more tension where you want it in your bicep by using the better form. So if you go from a strict bicep curl with, like, let's say 30-pound dumbbell, and you go up to a 50 and you do one of these, yes, you can actually and you're probably producing more tension with that 30-pound dumbbell in the bicep than with that 50-pound dumbbell, because you're producing tension everywhere else just to move that weight from point A to point B. So now that you hopefully understand a little bit that you need to produce more tension overload, not just progressive overload with just weight and reps, here are actually a few things that some people may not even think of as a way to produce progressive overload. Number one, you can increase the weight. Simple. You're just putting more weight on, let's say, that Smith machine. Number two, you can keep the weight the same, but you can do more reps. Self-explanatory. You're just using more reps. Number three, you can improve your form, your technique, to produce more tension in your pecs, let's say, if we're doing an incline press, and less tension on everything else. So now, without an increase in weight or reps, you've produced more tension because your technique changed. Number four, and this can kind of go with the last one, is you can increase the range of motion. So if you go from half reps to full reps, you're producing more tension. Self-explanatory too. Your just range of motion in that exercise and in that muscle, most importantly, has gotten greater. 5, decreased rest periods. So this is something that you might have heard as training density. So let's say you're doing, just for the ease of this scenario here, let's say you're going to do 3 sets of 10 with 315 on a Smith machine press, right? If you go from taking a minute and a half break in between those sets to a minute break in between those sets, and you still, but everything else is the same, your technique, your weight, your reps, everything is the same, but you just decrease the rest periods, that is also progressive overload. And another one that actually a lot of people don't think of is increasing the velocity. Okay, anyone that's taking basic physics knows force is mass times acceleration, right? So if you're using, we'll just stick to that Smith machine incline press. If you're pressing that bar and there's 315 pounds, and in one instance you press it at, I don't know, 0.6 meters per second, let's say, and then on the next time you can press it at 0.8 meters per second. Well, force is mass times acceleration. So the mass stay the same, but now that you've increased the acceleration, so that bar velocity, the amount of force that you had to produce to make that happen had to have increased. Increasing the velocity is not always the best way to produce more force and more tension, because obviously the injury risk. So if you're trying to build muscle, that's not always the most common one, probably not the best one, but it's just another way to produce more tension and more force, more contractile force within your muscles that doesn't have to do with increasing the weight or the reps. And there's other ways to produce progressive overload, like training frequency and total training volume and all these things. But these are just a few ones off the top of my head, besides just weight and reps, which everybody just runs to right away, that are ways to produce progressive overload. And I want to end this with having you think of it as not progressive overload, but progressive tension overload. All these things only matter and only produce progression if they lead to more tension. If they don't, it doesn't matter.